Hello, everybody, and welcome to Taking Control, the ADHD podcast on True Story FM. I'm Pete Wright, and I'm here with Nikki Kinzer.
Hello, everyone. Hello, Pete. Wright.
Oh, Nikki, we're continuing our conversation on ADHD and anxiety. It's like just a little tag, a coda on our series on comorbidities, and we've got a heavy hitter here to help us.
Yes, we do.
Walk through this. It's absolutely fantastic. Before we dig in, head over to takecontroladhd.com to get to know us a little bit better. You can listen to the show right there on the website or subscribe to our mailing list, and we will send you an email each time a new episode is released. If you really want to connect with us, join the ADHD Discord community. It's super easy to jump into that general community chat channel. That's at takecontroladhd.com/Discord. When you get in there, you'll find 1,000 of your dear friends that you've never met yet. Best friends you've never met yet. And you'll see them talking about all sorts of things. If you want to support the show, if you've been a long-time listener, you've never considered this, head over to patreon.com/the ADHD Podcast. For a few dollars a month, you can help guarantee that we continue to grow the show, add new features, invest more heavily in our community, and you can actually get access to a whole bunch of secret channels in Discord. You can listen to the show in the live stream and hear all of the mistakes and burps and stuff. And you get to ask our guests questions for a special members post show that is not available in the public version of this show. So consider that, patreon.com/the ADHD Podcast, to learn more. Russell Ramsay was the co-founder and co-director of the University of Pennsylvania's Adult ADHD Treatment and Research Program and a professor of clinical psychology in the Department of Psychiatry in the Perelman School of Medicine at UPenn. But then he retired, and now he is living the dream with a solo virtual practice and coming to us, spending lots more time podcasting all over the world. Russ, welcome to the ADHD Podcast.
Hey, Nikki, thanks for having me. It's an honor to be here.
Well, thank you.
Honor for us to have you. I think, Nikki, you've been doing all the hard thinking about this morning. Let's talk about why we're bringing this back to anxiety, apart from the fact that you and I are both in Anxiety's fan club.
Oh, we are, for sure. It's interesting because we just finished the series with the comorbidities, and the very first one we did was on depression and anxiety. And those are the two biggest ones, I think, that you see. I mean, we did a lot of other ones on OCD and eating disorders and some other things too. But anxiety and depression are definitely the top two that I see when I'm working with clients. And so you have this new book that you wrote, which is fantastic. It's called the Adult ADHD and Anxiety Workbook, one of many books that you've written in the past. So I'm curious, there was a couple of things that really caught my attention. First, the approach of how you have this as a workbook and working through your anxiety and ADHD. And then there's another piece I really want to get to as well, and that's the procrastivity that you talk about.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. But first of all, let's talk about the ADHD and anxiety. So we know they're common. What are the interactions and struggles that you see people face between these two things?
You know what? I make the case in the book, and but it's been something working in this field for 25 years. ADHD is an anxiety generator. And if we think about what is anxiety, it is the theme of anxiety is the perception of risk. And increasingly, a core feature of anxiety disorder is it's known as intolerance of uncertainty, the non-zero risk that goes in life. And there's some preliminary research that uncertainty goes hand in hand with anxiety. I know I can do it, but I don't know if I will do it when I need to do it, due to procrastination, disorganization, forgetfulness. And that for many adults with ADHD, that's what brings up, and not to create new things, but like different types of anxiety, like overwhelm anxiety. I got so much to do. How am I going to get through everything? Peopling anxiety. I don't call it that, but there is an element of social anxiety, like what will other people think of me if I'm late or I handed in something late? How will they judge me? And even planning anxiety. I know I'm supposed to make a plan, but isn't that a recipe of all the things I'm going to screw up on? Now, I'm putting words on what are very visceral, feelings, the feelings of anxiety, and working through the comorbidities. Like a lot of the comorbidities, they can be true comorbidities. Oh, I
Mhm.
just happen to have depression or anxiety or OCD at the same time, but especially depression and anxiety can stem from ADHD. With depression, the main theme is loss, loss of opportunity, loss of relationships, loss of a sense of a future. I won't be able to do this.
Right. That loss of agency, like
Loss
loss of
of agency,
control. Yeah.
loss of control, and with and that can also dovetail into the uncertainty that goes along with the anxiety and ADHD. So that intolerance of uncertainty, and there's preliminary research evidence looking at that connection. And like I said, my glib line, like ADHD is an anxiety and entropy generator because
Mhm.
it can undo best laid plans due to the nature of ADHD. So that was, um, that was the appeal when I was approached about doing something about ADHD and anxiety, because it's what I've seen in my practice for a long time.
Mhm.
It's so interesting to hear you talk about the anxiety generator. One of the things we've been talking a bunch about, Nikki and I, is this idea of a budget for uncertainty and planning with ADHD, right?
Mhm.
And what you just connected for me is that living with anxiety means essentially you have a budget of uncertainty that is zero. And that is the sort of deflationary spiral in sort of efficacy over time.
Right,
Mhm.
right. Yeah, and it's there a lot of the emotions and the cognitive piece of cognitive behavioral therapy, the negative mindsets, they often come from very real past experiences.
Right.
The times that the uncertainty comes into play. I didn't do what I set out to do, and I missed the deadline, and other emotions as well. And emotions, they're very helpful to have. They're signals for what's going on around us, and they do draw from our past experiences and help us predict things. Now, especially for people undiagnosed with ADHD, going through all the uncertainties and the setbacks that can come with it, it makes sense that there's going to be, and very often I'm a die in the wool cognitive behavioral therapist, and I get pushback from sometimes I've been doing presentations on this, and I'll talk about we're feeling beings before we're thinking beings, and sometimes the cognitive work is putting words on the emotions, and sometimes I get pushback. Well, you know, classic cognitive therapy would say the thoughts come first. Even though I had occasion to ask Dr. Beck one time, Dr. Aaron Beck, what what is the biggest misunderstanding that's still out there about ADHD, about
Mm.
cognitive therapy, and he said that thoughts always come first. I mean,
Hmm.
we are meaning-making creatures, but sometimes it starts with the feelings and we layer the thoughts. I mean, yes, thoughts can come first, but especially anxiety,
Right.
it is anticipating the uncertainty and the risk that can come with it. And even something, we'll get the procrastivity, but procrastination in general, it's usually our logical brain goes, yeah, it's really good if I start doing my homework a little early. I start finishing the work project at work on Friday so I don't have to worry about it over the weekend.
Mhm.
But if we go, yeah, but sometimes that doesn't work out so well. So we'll end up, you know what, I'll get it done over the weekend. Yeah, that's a good plan. And
Mhm.
if we do, that's fine.
Mhm.
But then later on, if we go, "Oh, yeah, but I forgot the kids have a soccer game this weekend or date night," or whatever the case may be, and now I gotta fit in work in there. So it's how the ADHD-based anticipations can, fueled by the understandable emotions, but how they can, it's like gasoline on fire sometimes.
Yeah. Well, and I just have to reinforce for people listening, like it's when you say you might get it done on the weekend, which is great. The perils of ADHD lie deep in intermittent reinforcement, and we can snooker ourselves around every corner, thinking because I did it this last time, surely I'm capable of doing it again. And our memories do not work well around intermittent reinforcement.
Right, right. Or,
Yeah.
and that's also a little bit of self-medication. I'll put it off
Yeah.
later when I'll be in the mood to do it. And this also, it's sort of like, the little like octopus tentacles reaching out to other areas of life. But then, yeah, you might get the work done on the weekend, but what does that do to your relationships or, things like that?
Right.
And, the ripple effects that maybe we're not thinking of. And I'm not saying none of us dots the I's and crosses the T's perfectly all the time, or, the relapse rate for procrastination is 100% for anybody with a human brain. But we're just talking
Right.
about trying to change the ratio so we're generally on top of things and,
Hmm.
those times. And it can be an informed decision sometimes that we do. Oh, my roommate from college, his flight got canceled, so he's in the city overnight. Oh, sorry, I had plans with what I was going to see. I'll see you next decade at the reunion. No, we can make an informed decision to say, I'll push that off to the weekend because I want to take advantage of this situation in the here and now.
Yeah. So you're coming from a CBT point of view within this book, and in your practice, you are too. So tell our audience a little bit more about what that is and how it helps those with ADHD. Just to be
Cognitive
clear.
behavioral therapy is a form of psychotherapy. People will ask, how is it different from a talk therapy? Well, it's a
Hmm.
talk therapy. I sit in a virtual room now talking with people. What set it apart, at least at the outset, was the focus on cognitions. So it started as a treatment of depression, and Dr. Beck found that sitting across, he used to joke around that he was a trained psychoanalyst, but and he did research on it, but as he would jokingly say, I would break my psychoanalytic mode, and I saw a client, her face change when I said something, and I asked her what she was thinking, and she said, "Oh, I thought you'd be upset with what I was saying." And he said, "No, I was just paying attention." But he started to wonder if his clients could have been other clients who are depressed might have had these what have come to be known as distorted thoughts, thinking errors, for lack
Hmm.
depressive thinking errors. Now, fast forward several decades, it was very and still is a successful treatment for depression, anxiety, and a host of other things. And it has been modified for adult ADHD and is considered an evidence supported psychosocial treatment. Now, you don't think yourself into having ADHD. Part of the appeal at the outset, probably the mid 90s, is when some of the first work, and more of the later 90s, when it was taking hold, modifying CBT for ADHD. And the initial appeal was the structure and the behavioral focus with the organization and whatnot. Now, living with ADHD, particularly if it's gone undiagnosed, it can lead to pessimistic, negative anticipations, thinking yourself out of things.
Hmm.
So, the cognitive behavioral therapy approach, yes, focused on problem solving, dealing with many of the issues of time management, organization, breaking tasks down, things like that, but also the emotions that go along with ADHD and how they are connected with the thoughts. So that braided cord of thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, I think CBT can be pretty good. And yes, it does focus on emotions, even though it's not in the title.
Hmm.
It has been shown to be effective both with the implementation of the coping strategies for dealing with ADHD. There's no trade secrets about what works, but also, I think that is helped by dealing with the mindsets, the thoughts and feelings associated with what we want to do, and how our thoughts and feelings, based on living with ADHD, can sometimes undermine what we're trying to do. Understandably, once we understand, the nature of ADHD and how it plays a role in everything people set out to do.
Well, and it's so interesting to me because when you were talking about before how you'll get that pushback around the feelings, the emotion piece of it. I mean, that's the first thing that stands out to me when you talk to someone with ADHD who's struggling is what they're feeling and the emotions that are coming up of shame and disappointment and frustration and hopelessness, and in a lot of ways, like why try again if it's it's never worked, it's always failed. And so it's interesting to me that gets pushed back because it's just
Well,
such an
it was more like when I'm presenting on the CBT approach, and I'll talk about like putting words on feelings. Some people, and it's a good problem to have that people are
sure.
getting bummed enough that the thoughts always come first, and there is an element of that out there, but also if we broaden the notion of thoughts,
Mm-hmm.
to what are our feelings telling us. I mean, I'm more of a lumper than a splitter when it comes
Yeah.
to this stuff.
Yeah.
I'm a dyed-in-the-wool, CBT therapist, but, we're looking at, how do what's it like being in your skin at that moment is another way
Mm-hmm.
I ask for the experience.
Mm-hmm.
And even sometimes the thoughts that we come up with, we're not necessarily thinking in these complete Elizabethan English sentences.
Mm-hmm.
But it's usually we have, impressions, and they're invisible, odorless, tasteless, but these impressions, the meanings that we have for them are as powerful as, you know, any other physical things affecting us in the environment. So some
Yeah.
of the pushback might be from, some uh, strict definitions of CBT,
Sure.
but it's usually when I just explain it like I just have, it usually makes sense that we're just trying
Mm-hmm.
to figure out, like, how am I reacting to this situation? How do my reactions maybe sometimes interfere with what I want to do, and how can I shape them and domesticate them and recruit them, and especially with feelings, change my relationships with these reactions so I
Mm-hmm.
can understand them, and move them in the direction I want to go in.
And that's the essence of the book, of the workbook, right? Is really working through these different domains and asking these questions to the reader.
Yeah. And even in asking the questions, I think Russ Barkley would say the second executive function to emerge. First is self awareness,
Mm-hmm.
that we are a separate self that requires self regulation. But then there's inhibition, the
Mm-hmm.
pause. And I love this quote that I use in one of my slides. When you press a pause button on a machine, it stops. But when you press a pause button on a human being, we start. Because in that pause, now we can act with intention. So even running through some of the questions in this or any workbook, I know you've had Ari Tuckman on, he has a
Mm-hmm.
wonderful workbook and other people do too. But very often what these questions serve, or in a session, it's the stopping and thinking. And it sounds
Mm-hmm.
simple, but it's hard to do.
Yeah.
And then we reflect on, what am I feeling? And sometimes it is hard to label. And I'm not saying, that there's a buzzer that if somebody puts the wrong label. It's just realizing, what's it like being in my skin right now? And how is that tied in with what I'm doing or what I want to do? And I know I'm just circling back on what you're saying, but the
Mm-hmm.
pause and running through some of the questions, um, it's a way to reflect, and it doesn't mean we change right away. But hopefully, the next time we encounter that, maybe this comes online a little bit. It's like, oh, this is one of these moments, and that's usually working with a lot of clients. How the change happens, like procrastination is probably like one of the number one, if not the number one problem I'm helping people with. And maybe after we're talking about it, they'll catch it after the fact. Oh, I procrastinated. Yeah, I got off track over here. And then the next time they might catch themselves. Oh, I'm moving off track now, but I still do it. But then they go, oh, I'm about to do this. Oh, but I want to stay with this. And nothing's perfect. But that's sort of the process, like with these pauses. Hopefully, we're eventually able to steer ourselves in the direction that we want to go in more often than not.
I think this makes it really challenging. Because, well, and specifically, as we come off of this, the comorbidity discussion, you use the term braided cord, which really resonates with me. Of all these sort of conditions that are living together, but so many of these discussions lead us to this conversation of where is our ADHD and where is our anxiety, and how do we rationalize the differences between the two, how they relate to one another. Is that even useful when you, as you say, are a lumper? Thinking about the whole complex sort of organism, is it useful to have that conversation of which is which?
You know what? It can be, but um, one of the I was well trained in cognitive behavioral therapy. I went to Penn as a postdoctoral fellow at the Center for Cognitive Therapy. Was there a couple of years. ADHD was not on my radar screen.
Mm.
I got
Sure.
asked to the line I use, I had as much business of co-founding an ADHD program as I did joining the Blue Man Group or something like that. It's like my resume
Don't
was
sell
equal. I could
yourself
have gone
short, Russ.
either way. Well, I did have background in CBT, but in working through and talking about comorbidities, I think one point I also make is I think the executive functioning self-regulation model of ADHD, we all have executive function. So if you're depressed, your executive functioning will go down, even if you don't have ADHD. So I think the executive function model, I'd like to see it more in medical psychiatry and psychology education, because I think it made me a better therapist in general, even for the clients I see without ADHD, because it does have relevance for depression and anxiety. So when I'm conceptualizing a case or working with somebody, it's not like, okay, today are we working on anxiety or ADHD?
Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
pretty often I'm drawing on, since we're talking about anxiety, the progressive exposure steps that go into treatment for anxiety, which are ultimately you're going to have to face your fears.
Yeah.
So if it's
Hmm.
about like OCD, and I know OCD is in a different category from anxiety, but
We learned a
um,
lot from Dr. Oliveria about
Olivaria,
that.
yeah, he's good.
Yes.
He's very good. He's excellent in that. So anyway, but eventually it is facing, the feared, the
Hmm.
feared exposure to the feared item. Or if it's about dealing with panic attacks, it's going out and going farther away from home.
Hmm.
Well, there are many elements of that dealing with procrastination. Oh, I really don't feel like doing homework. It's overwhelming. It's this, that, or the other thing. So how I view it, and I'd certainly appreciate feedback to the contrary if people have different experiences. But I can, like, in terms of the CBT for ADHD, I see it as being blended together because they're working in terms of the outcome that somebody's trying to do behaviorally, which
Right.
is the measure. Changing thoughts, changing feelings, but usually the measure is going to be, am I doing what I set out to do? Am I functioning better? Whatever words we want to put on it.
Hmm.
And if part of that is the exposure, if that gets double duty out of, okay, I'm less anxious because I learn, or I can domesticate my anxiety. I can feel anxiety at the same time I'm starting this task, but actually the starting of it and getting into it for a minute or two, it goes down because, like Hitchcock, the suspense director, would say, there's no fear in the bang, only the anticipation of the bang. So
Right.
once you're engaged in it, now you're doing it. And even if it's a little hard, it's probably not as hard as you were anticipating. Or if it is hard, it's only hard in one way, not the 83 different ways you can think about it in anticipation. And that's usually a fairer fight where usually people can get farther along than they would have otherwise. And that's part of that progressive improvement. So I see it as a twofer. You can work on
Mm.
both at the same time. Yes, there might be things like panic attacks or other types of anxiety conditions that there may be a companion set of panic attack specific coping, but usually the anxiety we're talking about that stems from ADHD, usually the more generalized anxiety and the task related avoidance due to the discomfort
Hmm.
of dealing with it in a broader term, because sometimes the anxiety isn't necessarily a fear of the task, but it's the discomfort, the prospect of failure or getting stuck, or that's the uncertainty. I don't
Hmm.
Mhm.
know what's going to happen, but something bad might happen. I've likened the feeling of ADHD to food poisoning. Not literally the same thing, but what happens in food poisoning? We're presumably having a food we like, it's
Right.
tainted, and then our body does what it's supposed to do. It feels awful, but it gets rid of it.
Hmm.
What happens the next time you're presented with that food? Are you gobbling it down, or does your body go into, I remember this?
Yeah. Not so sure.
And
Yeah.
Right.
that's what tasks are like for folks with ADHD, school and work and other things. It's similar, maybe not the same visceral, but
Hmm.
it's usually like that felt physical sense of, oh, this isn't going to be good. But if I can do something else, and
Hmm.
what procrastivity
Right. Yeah.
is
Perfect.
escaping the school or work by doing usually something maybe not necessarily fun, but a household chore, or it's almost like a plea bargaining. I'm not going to work on taxes. I'll mow the lawn because the lawn has to get done too. And so we escape the priority task to do that thing, and it is productive. It is known in the procrastination literature as productive procrastination, but it's actually a subtle avoidance. We could always say it's like gateway procrastination if we want to put a jokey term on it, because it sets the pathway for avoiding. Like I usually use doing income taxes, mowing the lawn versus taxes,
Hmm.
just as the illustration, but then it makes getting back to that priority task a little harder. because it's getting built up in our head. And now we do have less time and energy or whatever to work on it. Even though that's sort of a self-handicapping because we're siphoning time away from doing it.
So, in one of your other books, Rethinking Adult ADHD, you talk about this, and the subtitle of the book itself is helping clients turn intentions into actions. So, how do we break this cycle of procrastivity?
Um, I didn't come up with the term procrastivity. I got it from a client.
Mm.
And when I looked it up, as much as you can trust Urban Dictionary online, has been around since 2010 or so. But I always I had a great dissertation chair, cite everything that you can. Um, no, but what interested me about procrastivity was, well, what is it about mowing the lawn or doing these other chores around that or other things that themselves might have been put off? And are there some ways we can hack some of those and sort of reverse engineering procrastivity? And this is just my take on it.
Hmm.
Some of the features that they generally have compared with the tasks we typically avoid, one, they tend to be more manual or hands-on, physical,
Oh, that's
mowing the
interesting.
lawn versus doing taxes or studying or writing a paper.
Cleaning the
Um,
house.
you're cleaning the house,
Yeah.
something
Hmm.
physical, running errands,
Hmm.
taking the dog, washing the car, giving the dog a bath, whatever.
Also, a clear done state.
Well, there's usually a clearer sense of onboarding.
Hmm.
Okay,
Mhm.
mowing the lawn, go out, fill it up with gas, put it in my playlist, do it. A clearer sense of task progression. If you're mowing your own lawn, you know how long it's going to take you, and you can see the progress. Okay, quarter of the way done, halfway done, complete, done with the lawn, at least for this week. And people, this is just anecdotal, but seem like they'll spend more time on a procrastivity task. They'll spend like an hour, hour and a half mowing the lawn rather than 30 minutes on taxes or writing a
Yeah.
paper
Totally.
because there's a clearer sense of achieving the outcome. There's a clearer sense of efficacy. I believe I can do this task more than the other one. So what to how that informed like the how you don't do things forum, and it's been upgraded in the new book with the anti-procrastination forum. Um, It's all right. How do we make these harder tasks? Writing an essay, studying, doing taxes, how do we make it manual? And usually it is breaking things down into getting to a workstation. Can you get to the library to study? Or
Hmm.
for me with writing, I got a local coffee shop that I go to. It's my go to workplace for that. Where I think I wrote the last two books there. Um, Getting to the workstation, picking up the item, pick up all the envelopes that say important tax document enclosed and open them. You really haven't done your taxes yet, but you've just exponentially increased the likelihood that you'll go, okay, let me organize them, look at them.
Hmm.
Let me reread the last two paragraphs I wrote last time. Let me log on, even if it's starting an essay. Let me just open a Word document and save as John's essay
Something.
52224, something like
Hmm.
that.
Mhm.
You could stop right there, but you just exponentially and at least at the very least, you could say, "I didn't procrastinate, I did something."
Right.
But it's like Tom Hanks paddling out over the wave in Castaway. Now, I
Hmm.
guess the example breaks down because then he's almost, like, paddling out to certain death at that point, but let's not let,
Right, right.
facts
Let's
Let's
get in
not
the
not
look
way of
at
a
finish
good
that
that.
metaphor.
let's not let facts get in the way of a good example. No, but it's making the task manual,
Right.
also, sequencing the first few steps, not the whole thing, not everything you have to do, but the near step of let me get over here, let me open it up, let me fill in on the tax form name, address, social security number, outlining a paper, but not any formal outline. Just hey, can you spend 10 minutes, 600 seconds, and that's like a bounding a task. 600
Mhm.
seconds.
I love that. I've never heard that before. 10 minutes, 600 seconds.
Well, but you know
Yeah.
what? But this is part of how we think
Yeah.
about things. We think about the particles different than the whole. We'll think about
Right.
pebbles different than gravel. And all gravel is a pile of pebbles.
Right.
We know that $19.99 is really $20,
Hmm.
but we gravitate to 19.99 because it is less, but
Hmm.
it feels a lot less than it is. So there
Hmm.
are
Yeah.
these hacks about how our brain works. And it's 600 seconds. And even Other analogs from time. How long does it take you to walk across campus? 12 minutes. Are you willing to spend the amount of time it would take to walk across campus starting your paper? With the idea that if you can once I get started, yeah, if you stop after 12 minutes, that's 12 more minutes than you did. But
Yeah,
usually people will say, once I get started.
they can go.
But even before portable timepieces, people would use these like not algorithms, analog for time. I'll be with you in the milking of a cow, because people knew roughly how long that meant in that day and age. So these felt sense. And there's actually some researchers on time, that's how they got into their research. One couple, they were a couple in research, and this is old school, but they would pause their VCR, go make a snack, and then start looking at each other. Because I'm a Gen Xer, so if you knew, after a while, if you pause your VCR, the tape would start up again after a certain amount of time. But
Mhm.
this is how we learn how long things last and get our sense of time, by how long things take in the environment, and that's how we get our felt sense of time. And now nobody's done a study on this, but it would be an interesting study with the inattention of ADHD, if this is part of time blindness. This is
Right.
total conjecture.
Mhm.
But whether that is what, because self-monitoring is impaired, well, what if other monitoring and just not being able to sequence and track how long things take, if that goes into time blindness a little bit? So that was a far avenue,
No,
a crooked walk away from doing
No,
taxes, but how we try to
not at
bound it
all.
back to make it reasonable, so we believe, I can do it for 600 seconds, or I can do it for at
absolutely.
least 5 problems. That's building that self-trust, the
Mhm.
self-efficacy, and our sense of enoughness. Okay, even though this is hard for me, that I'm enough that I can do this, and we wanna build that up even more, because very often there's that thought about I'm less than,
And that's kind of the
other.
CBT that you're talking about, is being able to reframe that thought of
Well, that's
this
part of the
is
reframing. Yes,
yeah,
yes.
this is enough. This is good, and not going the other way. That
In your own ADHD friendly way. So
right.
one person's reframe might look a little different. One person
Mhm.
might be able to say, I can sit down for 30 minutes and do this. Somebody else might say, I can I can at least unload the bowls out of the top rack of the dishwasher. And if
Yeah.
that's all I
I
do,
use
then I
Yeah,
that
get
as an
started.
example too. Yeah, just
yeah.
open the door.
You know what?
Like that,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
just one
yeah.
thing,
Or
opening
get
the
to the
door.
kitchen, because
Yeah.
even the steps we go do, going there, that's like behavioral scripting, behavioral priming. And
Mhm.
interestingly, this is something I've been more interested in, since the book. It's called 4E cognition, and I don't have the E's memorized. I'm just so happy that I've memorized cognitive disengagement syndrome from sluggish cognitive tempo, because I started with that. I finally committed it to memory. But 4E cognition, it's more about how the brain evolved, interacting with the environment. And there's a lot of things like managing the environment, movement, how this can help foster cognition. And if we're moving towards the task, it is getting at some elements that, yeah, will help us with the higher order things like writing the paper, or even walking around saying to ourselves, like talking aloud
Mhm.
what we're trying to type out, but saying to ourselves or saying to our dog what we're trying to work out and write. That is a nice way to use our language system to get unstuck. Um, and the distant self-talk that I
Mhm.
talk about in the new book, as a way, it's both useful for task initiation and for managing emotions.
Okay, so I
Ethan
think I
Cross,
missed that. What is
okay,
distant?
distant self-talk. It is
Yeah.
not specific to ADHD. Ethan Cross with a K. He's a neuroscientist at the University of Michigan, and I was aware of his research before. And he has a good book on his approach called Chatter. I think it
Mm.
was published during the pandemic, 20 or 21. It was published. Um, Talking to yourself by name or as you. So
Oh.
this would be if I'm talking to myself, Russ, you just need to get to the coffee shop on Saturday, get there, order your coffee, and you can pick up where you left off. Or Russ, you're always anxious about what you're writing. You don't think you know anything, but once you get in there, you find something, you find your hook, just stick with it and you get through it, for the stress emotions. Cross's work found that in lab-based studies, talking to ourselves by name or as you for a task you just need to do this, or talking ourselves through our feelings. I think some of the research, it was people who had gone through a relationship breakup and they were either asked to do I statements, immersive self-talk. I need to get over this. I need to not think about the person who dumped me, drawing from past personal experience there. Um, or the task, I have to get this done. I have to work harder versus, you just need to get out there. And I'm illustrating for effect here, but
Right.
found that the distance self-talk was helpful. And it's a very nice portable strategy, and bringing it up with a lot of folks with ADHD, especially two things: task initiation
Mm-hmm.
and the emotions that can go along with it. And now this goes beyond the data, but I think what it does, one, it makes us pause and think.
Mm-hmm.
We have to funnel the task or our emotions through the language system. Now, this is not saying we have to blunt emotions and no feeling. No, it's working with your feelings. It's changing your relationship with your feelings or with the task. Um, Saying aloud, which is action. Speech is
Mhm.
motor. It's behavioral. And then we're also hearing it
Yeah.
at the same time. So the auditory processing, and very often, hearing it, it's different than when it's bouncing around in our head. And this goes way beyond the data, but a lot of people say, I can come up with good plans or advise other people what to do. I could coach other people what to do, but I can't do it myself. Well, I don't know if there's anything to putting it in the language of speaking to somebody else where we're more compassionate using the you messages, because
Yeah.
people say, I'm hard on myself, but maybe the language of you and putting it in the supportive language. Now, this is, again, total conjecture, but there is evidence support, not specific to ADHD. To my knowledge, it's not been studied in ADHD, but it has been studied by Ethan Cross and the book Chatter, and there's published
Mm-hmm.
research on it. But it
Well,
just
What's
seems
so
like nice,
interesting,
portable,
yeah,
and a lot of people say, I do. Now that you mentioned, I do that
it's kind of
you
already.
like
do
the
that, right?
affirmations. I mean, it's just like it's
100%.
affirming
Or I'm
too.
not the
Like,
handiest guy in the world.
yeah.
I'm putting together something from IKEA, or not
Mm-hmm.
putting it together. But I'll say the instructions aloud to my slot A goes into slot B.
Right.
Not because it
Yeah.
magically does anything, but it's like I'm trying
You're
to, somehow
processing
figure
it.
out what I'm
Yeah.
processing it. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that.
It's fascinating to me because it connects directly back to this. First of all, I'm going to be referring to all of my time-related statements in the form of milking of a cow, and
Right, right.
but you know what? In all seriousness, like there's a real physiological behavioral connection to time with ADHD, and it's why like I can't use really a digital clock. So my watch, my clock on the wall, they're all physical, so I can see it.
Right.
But it's even better when I can refer to in my own head, like I can get to this one thing in one unloading of the dishwasher. Maybe it takes me 10
Right,
minutes to put everything away. I understand that because I've lived it. That's my
right,
lived experience. The
right.
same thing goes when hearing my own self talk out loud, not just meditating on it, but
Mhm.
thinking it, then saying it at myself. That's a behavioral approach to understanding my relationship with my emotions and with time. I think that there's something, again, to your point about being total conjecture. I I feel like my lived experience is my measure of time and accounting of emotion.
Right,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? I always say probably the best analog time depiction is an old-fashioned hourglass. You
Mm-hmm.
see
Yes.
the sign draining from the top to the bottom chamber, and that just captures time. I mean, yes, the second hand could be like 15 seconds away from being late, but, "Oh, I'm not late yet."
Yes.
Right.
Because that's an
Right.
abstraction. It's wonderful, all these tools that we have, but sometimes it's that winding down, the countdown, the battery on our laptop. Oh, I'm at 10%. I have to hurry. And
Mm-hmm.
in fact,
Yes.
I think Nancy Rady might have mentioned that in her book, like
Mm.
unplugging your laptop or unplugging your device and then using the battery as a countdown clock.
Oh,
It's
smart.
But
a pretty good one.
yeah,
Yeah.
no, it's not bad, but other things, because sometimes or that's, sometimes people gamifying things, they'll
Yeah.
try to make it a race to get through things. So these are all
Hmm.
just different ways we deal with time, um, and finding our personalized ways to engage with it,
Mm-hmm.
including, and this goes back to the avoidance of planning sometimes, because winging it is a high cognitive load task for anybody,
Right.
figuring things out. And because that presumes, okay, at some point I'll wing it and feel like doing taxes or homework, and we probably won't.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but going back to that, like even with the planning, breaking things down into actionable steps and planning for downtime.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
dedicated times that we go, okay, after this time, either breaks and also having bounded breaks.
Mm-hmm.
Because some breaks in the middle of the day might be bad breaks, like going online or, checking things. But at the end of the day, they're fine if it's open ended. But
Mm-hmm.
even things like bounded breaks, like a cup of coffee or a walk around the block, which again are physically based,
Yeah.
things like that. If we know we're going to get off track, but also just having, okay, after 7 o'clock, I'm going to putter around or, and like I said, making informed decisions. Okay. I thought I was gonna do more, and sometimes it's because we're tired.
Mm-hmm.
We've been
Mhm.
working really hard on a big project, and we get to 4 o'clock and said, "I was gonna do this at 4, but you know what? I'm giving myself a break. I'm making an informed decision, and I'm gonna reschedule this. I'll do it first thing tomorrow," or something like that. I mean, so not all avoidance and not all avoidance is avoidance. Sometimes it is strategically, changing the play at the line of scrimmage, like, once you see what the defense is doing. Sorry for the sports
Right.
analogy, but
Well, no,
Right.
I think it's so true because when we talk about because the book that we have coming out is around planning, and I love that you use that as one of the examples in your a lot of
yeah,
examples in your
the
book.
planning
Yeah.
the planning
Pl-
anxiety because, facing
Yeah.
it
yes,
helps reduce the anxiety, yeah, as
it
you guys know,
is.
probably from the book, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. But one of the things that I will share with clients when they're time blocking and learning how to time block is that there's a difference between setting out the intention, putting it on your calendar. You see the alarm come up to remind you that, hey, it's time to transition into this. And you get to make the decision at that point. Do I want to continue to go through the plan, or is something else more important or whatever? But there's a lot of empowerment with pausing for that moment and making that decision, and rather than thinking you're going to do it sometime during the day, and then at the end of the day you get to it, you never got to it, you feel terrible, you feel like, there I go again, not following through with my plans. So there's this empowerment to it where you can change your mind. It's just a placeholder, it's nothing setting in stone,
Right.
but yet you get to make that decision. And there's so much power into trusting yourself again, that I
Yeah,
can do this, I can manage my time and
and also
decide.
I hear the phrase out there more, but, talking about our future self, but even in
Mhm.
that moment, let's just say it's like 1 o'clock or something like that, and you go, think about how your 2 o'clock self will feel if you at least get a
Yeah.
Yeah.
little of this task done. And I think that's also useful. I mean, yeah, planners are set up where we can see, okay, I'm gonna wrap this up at 3 o'clock, and then I got a big blank spot there. And it's
Mhm.
sort of like the next exit on a highway or something. Okay, let's just get to that exit. It can help prime us and work us through. Um, but at the same time, thinking about our future self, how good will it feel at 2 o'clock to at least make some headway on this task?
Yeah.
And rather than everything feeling like, oh, it's projecting forward a little bit and the thinking through, and it's part of the pause
Yeah.
and the positive feeling for, and it's also recalibrating the next hour. Oh my gosh, an hour, but it's like, okay, but it's 1/24th of your day, or maybe
Yeah.
it's 30 minutes or whatever it is. But thinking through, it's like, okay, 2 o'clock's not that far away now that I think about it that way.
Right.
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 And I've had
Right.
Well,
people
and
like that, the exact same increment of time on one day. Oh my gosh, that's 2 hours. On another one, oh, it's only 2 hours. But it's
yeah.
Right.
like
Right.
something you like. Oh, it's only 2 hours. This will be great. But
So
it's 2 hours.
how long does it
That
really take to milk a cow? Like, how much time are we looking for that?
I don't know. I don't know. I can probably tell you how long it takes. I have to run out to the store and back.
Right?
No,
Yeah.
no, yeah, yeah. No, I
This
don't.
is great.
No, but I don't have literally hands-on experience with that at all. So no.
It's 10
We still have
minutes.
to kind of
It's
guess.
10 minutes.
10
It's
There
about
you go.
minutes.
10 minutes.
There you go.
10
Well,
minutes.
but you know what?
Okay.
One time I was bringing this up in a workshop and talking about, like, a cup of coffee is something, even though you could have some, like, huge, and I said I would never advise this, but this is probably where the cigarette break came from, and I'm a
Yeah.
lifetime smoker, and so I have no idea how long it takes. And somebody in the audience deadpan without missing a beat. 7.5 minutes, and it broke up. But so I said, I'll take your word for it. But that's the notion of these bounded tasks, 7.5 minutes. The length of time for a cup of coffee, for a cigarette, a walk around the block,
Right.
whatever it is, walking across campus. How long would you, when I was at Penn, I'd take the train in, and how long will you stay on the platform? Like, if it's less than 10 minutes, I'll stay on the platform. Could you invest that much time in terms of at least starting this task to see how it goes? At least make an informed decision. If after 8 minutes you go, it's not happening today, great. That's an informed decision. You didn't procrastinate. That's an informed decision. That's the personalization of all the skills and tools. I think in the more recent book, I use the analogy a lot of the recipe. It's like, this is a recipe book, but if you go, I'm vegan, so I'm going to replace that, or I like salt on mine. That's the goal. It's not like, no, you must do
this, and this, right?
Sure.
It's a getting started.
Yeah.
Getting started, if you will.
Yeah. I love it. Thank you so much. This was so great.
Yes, absolutely. So the book just dropped as we record this, right? It just
May 1st,
just a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
Outstanding. How's it going so far?
I don't know. Once it's done, it's out there. So it's more.
Yeah.
It's more like I climbed the mountain, so I'm just happy to be down. So, no, I mean, some colleagues are reaching out with compliments, but they're not going to tell you you're awful. So, who knows? It's out there, and hopefully it's helpful.
What were you thinking?
Exactly. You got it all wrong.
Yeah.
Probably many of your guests, like. Ari Tuckman did the forward for it, and like when I grow up, I want to be Ari Tuckman. No, I totally respect him, and he's too nice of a guy, and he's a very highly competent, top of the line therapist, and Roberto as well, and I think he had Sharon Celine on.
Yes,
many times.
She's one of my new friends in the ADHD world that respected her work from afar, but you've got a great list there, so I hope it didn't bring it down too much.
You have added
Not
to
at
it.
all.
No, this is great.
Absolutely. No, we sure appreciate you hanging out with us. I'm gonna send people. Let's just make sure I get this right. In the show notes, we're gonna send them to cbtforadhd.com.
That's
Is that right?
Yes. Sometimes people hear CBD and they get really excited, but it's cbtforadhd.com.
That's funny.
They get some really disappointed people sometimes coming up.
Yeah.
Where's your store? I don't see the store.
Yeah, exactly. Where's my prescription?
Cash only for Russell Ramsay.
I got some cows in the back if you want to milk them.
Links to the book and to Russ's work are in the show notes, everybody. Thank you so much for hanging out and listening to the show. We appreciate your time and your attention. Don't forget, if you have something to contribute to the conversation, we're heading over to the Show Talk channel on our Discord server, and you can join us right there by becoming a supporting member at the deluxe level or better. On behalf of Nikki Kinzer and Russell Ramsay, I'm Pete Wright, and we'll see you next week right here on Taking Control, the ADHD Podcast.